It seems to me that really what occurs, the more conscious we become, the more awakened we become, is that a lot of our preferences or attachments do fall away, and we have less and less attachment to our human preferences. Some of the preferences will disappear, some preferences will remain, but we become less attached to them in the sense that we don't think they have some sort of concrete final reality. A preference is just a preference. Preference isn't right or wrong. When we become attached to a preference, then our preference becomes our ideology. Our preference becomes some form of fundamentalism, even if it's just arguing over what flavor of ice cream is the best, instead of, well, I just prefer this flavor. It's not really the best in any absolute sense or in any sense at all. It's just the one I prefer. But at another point in our life, we often do ascribe a sort of absoluteness or truthfulness with our preferences instead of just seeing it's just a preference. It doesn't really have much to do with truth or reality in any big sense. It's just a human preference. And in that sense, they're fine. To have a preference is fine. It's the attachment that forms all the difficulty. It's the attachment that distorts our perception of what is. And so it's really common that the more awake we become, the fewer preferences we have, and the preferences that are there, we start to feel a real unattachment to them. It just naturally will happen that we're just not attached, and that attachment will just naturally fall away. It's one of the hallmarks of being more and more spiritually awake, as we have less and less and less and less and less attachments. Not because we shouldn't have attachments, it's just one of the byproducts of spiritual evolution, and it can, as the person who wrote this in said, it can feel a little flat at times. That's a phase you go through, where when your attachments start to fall away, and you're not running all over the place in life trying to find your zest or your zeal or your happiness or love or approval or whatever it is in all these exterior activities or people or places or things. As that starts to fall away, you often do go through this sort of plateau phase where things can feel pretty flat. Things can feel kind of empty, where the zest that attachment can actually give you, it also has the other opposite side. It can give you a lot of angst, but it can also give you a kind of a zest, a certain kind of energy. Is what I call personal will. Personal will is the sort of driving force of separation, right? And as that starts to fall away, you often get into sort of this plateau phase where you don't really feel that much anymore, or it may drop away altogether, and yet we might not have connected with a deeper, what's on the other side of that plateau. What's on the other side of that sort of flat phase. Because there is something on the other side of that. It's not necessarily a new kind of zeal, but it's kind of an aliveness, a vitality, a sense of well-being for no cause and for no reason. And well-being is its own sort of energy. It's its own sort of vitality. And so often it's a matter of just letting the preferences or the attachment to them fall away, even though at times it's kind of confusing, maybe to you and maybe to the people around you, because, all of a sudden, in a certain sense, you're not the person that they knew, the person that was attached to this or attached to that or attached to something else. But it's not a final point. As you really let go, you kind of fall into a different kind of vitality, like I said, it's sort of an uncaused sense of well-being, where we're not trying to derive our well-being necessarily through what we're doing, although doing certain things can bring its own vitality, but we're not searching for our vitality through our accomplishments, through the things we can attain, the power we can get, or whatever it is, that it's just a sort of uncaused vitality. But you can also get stuck in that plateau, because that plateau, even though there's not a lot of energy, it feels there's a safety in it. There's a feeling of safety. So the remnants of ego can actually start to kind of conglomerate around that sense of no struggle, in that sort of plateau phase, in that sort of really empty phase. But eventually you start to feel that, okay, I may not be struggling, but holding on to that starts to make the experience of being, the experience of living, pretty flat and pretty empty. And when we can let go of, if there is any attachment to that state, we can begin to let go. And it's a deeper kind of inquiry. What really, what is that deeper sense of vitality? What is that deeper sense of a kind of uncaused sense of well-being? We can't really find that out until we've really let go. We can't really, it's kind of like you got to let go first in a really deep way to have that uncaused sense of being to become sort of the undercurrent of your life. You can access it through peak experiences sometimes, temporarily, but then the old sort of attachment can come back. But once you kind of really go through that phase, it becomes more of just a way of being.